Good morning to everybody and welcome to this online debate run by the Florence School of Regulation on communities dealing with renewable energy. What's their future in Europe? As you might see, we have four guests to discuss this topic with us today, because it's not a lecture, it's really a debate. I suppose that some of you by now are already aware of Zoom. It's one of the most trendy platforms today's. I don't know if Chiara want to say something on the use of the platforms and introduce, but apparently no.
Well, of course, that's the audience is invited and welcome to post any comments in the chat while we reserve the Q&A folder for proper relevant questions to the speakers. Thank you very much. I hope you will enjoy this event.
Exactly, this is important. At the end of the debate, we will have a Q&A. So if you have specific and detailed questions, not comments, but questions for our guests, I invite you to write them on the Q&A chat box, whereas for any other things, you can use the general chat. Okay, so we can start. I will share my presentation just to introduce the topic. Okay, I hope you see now my slides. This is the topic, communities dealing with renewable energy. What's their future in Europe? As you probably know, because you are here, energy communities are a big topic in Europe, at least since the discussions on the clean energy package in 2016. We have a lot of discussion on this, and there are already a few reports on the topic. I just posted on this slide and on the next one a few of the things that I read and I found particularly interesting to our debate. You can see, of course, a lobby group, you can see regulators, you can see research projects funded by the European Union. You can see the JRC and other people, everybody willing to talk about energy communities in Europe. Also, FSR, of course, is involved on this. We have a project called FRESCO, the future of RES communities. We wrote a topic of the month on this. We are working on that thanks to the support of the Fondazione TUC. But let's come back to the debate of today, and I will introduce you the four speakers that accepted our invitation and will help us to dig deeper in this topic. We have Albert Banal from Spain. He works in an energy cooperative, Som Energia, and also at the University Pompeu Fabra. With a similar, let's say, profile, we have Patrick Devine-Wright from the UK, working as a professor at the University of Exeter, and also involved in a community energy there. And then from, let's say, more the institutions, we have Yvonne Finger from Bundesnetzagentur, the German energy regulator. And finally, we have Jan Steinkohl from the European Commission, from the DG Energy. So let me thank them for being with us. But this is the plan for today. You will see we have 4 moments in our debate because we thought that to understand better the future of energy communities, we need to address 3 different steps. First, what do energy communities do? Second, what is the legal or policy framework in the EU and of course also at the member state level And then after that, we can talk about the scenarios for the development of energy communities in the near future. But this, as you know, is a debate, and we will have a Q&A session with you. But even before that, we will share some polls with you so you can express your ideas and give, let's say, kick off the discussion. So we can start from the first topic. What do energy communities do? What are the functions they perform in the energy system and in our societies? What are the motivations, the driven people to get involved with them? There are already some studies on this. I just report you the result of a research by the JRC, the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, where they investigated a few case studies, and they saw something that was already quite common, that generation of electricity is probably the first activity for energy communities. But besides that, there are others. There is supply, there is energy efficiency, there are newer services. And the motivations are different as well. So I will ask you now, what is your view? And we will have the first poll. Let me see if I'm able to launch it. And I will invite, of course, also our panelists to vote. If you press the button, you have the box below. You can vote. I see already quite a few people answering. We are almost 80 attending the workshop, the debate, so it's good. I encourage the last few one to vote. You see, you have different choices. You choose the one that you prefer the most, the one that you consider most important. A few seconds, and then we close. The rule of the 3 beep, you know, 1 beep, 2 beep, 3 beep. Please, Chiara, close the poll, and if you can show the result to everybody. I hope that everybody see also my panelist. We have a winner. It's the provision of economic benefits for the community members. But as you see, there are at least one other option, very high ranked, contribution to GHG emissions and strengthening the sense of community. Whereas, let's say, more secure energy supply or energy poverty alleviation are less important. So, having said that, I would say we can start asking our panelists what do they think about these results, what is their point of view on the functions and the benefits of energy communities. And I will start with Professor Patrick Devine-Wright. He worked a lot in the past also on this from an academic point of view, so maybe he can give us a view. Patrick, you have 4 minutes, more or less, and then I will do the same for Albert. And then Yvonne and Jan will be able to comment, if possibly, in 2 minutes, because they will get more time later. Patrick, the floor is yours.
I'm still muted. Am I? No, I'm not. Okay, great. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I've got 4 minutes, so here we go. Not an easy task. I think the first thing I'd like to say is that we know from the research literature on community energy that those kinds of initiatives are incredibly diverse. They get engaged in different kinds of energy activities. And we also know that communities are diverse in and of themselves, socioeconomically, structurally, culturally, topographically, you name it. So with that diversity in mind, I think it's very unlikely that any single motivation is going to be very important across this space. So I think instead we need to think carefully about what might be local drivers for a project that might be distinct across different places and different communities. I also think that whilst it's useful to draw on anecdotal evidence, it's also very useful to draw on social science and academic research. And the issue about why people would choose to support community energy or why people would choose to participate in community energy has been the subject of some research to date. And I've also been involved in surveying members of my own Exeter Community Energy Initiative, which is a renewable energy cooperative based in the southwest of England. Now, what's interesting about those is that they tend to show a range of motivations, which is what you've just shown. They include things like issues about renewable energy, green energy, environmental considerations generally. But I also think they show that the community energy space is as much about non-energy issues to do with being part of something, feelings of belonging, identity, cohesion. And what we found in the Exeter community case was actually wanting to participate in a different kind of economic model where communities are strong actors in economic markets. And that's not something which is just about whether you benefit or not, but about whether communities can be actors in their own right in a different kind of economy or economic system. So there's a whole range of local, systemic, global issues that come up here. And I wanted to cite some research that was published last year by a research team in the Netherlands, Sloot et al. In a journal called Global Environmental Change. Now, what was interesting is that when they asked participants in Dutch community energy initiatives, what are the motives that are important for you? They said financial motives were very important, and they said environmental motives were very important, and social or communal motives were very important. So if financial motives are clearly important, but when they did some regression analyses, which are statistical tests to see which are the most important factors that predict whether people actually get involved in community energy initiatives, they found that financial motives were less important than social and environmental motives. So I think we need to distinguish between whether we're trying to explain whether people support community energy as an idea or whether people actually tangibly get involved. Far fewer people tangibly get involved, and it's often more down to wanting to participate in something and be part of a group and be part of something that contributes to belonging and green motives rather than will I make some money out of it personally and become richer as a result.
That's interesting. It's interesting, and it's good that you address some people with surveys because we really need to test. We can have ideas in mind, but then we need to advance our knowledge. We really need to ask people and see what they reply. So now, Albert, you have a direct experience in another energy community from Spain. So maybe you can provide your point of view.
Yes, although I have a bit I guess a similar profile to Patrick, I'm going to do a bit the opposite. So essentially, I'm going to use the example of our cooperative to show you, if you want, a case study rather than talking about academic research. So I wanted to share some slides. I don't know if you see them. Do you see my slide? Do you see my slide?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So I just wanted to use these 4 minutes I have to give you a bit of a introduction to what our cooperative does, and essentially also highlight also the same idea that Patrick was mentioning, which is the diversity of motives that people have when engaging in our cooperative. Our cooperative, in fact, is called Somenergia, which in Catalan means essentially we are energy, right? So we are a cooperative of more than 65,000 members that essentially produces and sells electricity to the members of the cooperative. So the idea of the cooperative is that the person is at the center, but of course you cannot change the world alone. So you do it as a group, as a cooperative. But the cooperative decides which projects we build, how we finance it, right? And then we essentially put this energy into the grid. And then also the second side of the cooperative takes some of this energy to the grid, and then again sells it back to the members, right? So a very important thing in the organization is the key thing is the members. So the members essentially vote and decide which are the main things the cooperative will do, and they do that once a year. The members also elect the governing body, of which I'm part. We're volunteers, right? And essentially we try to implement these guidelines and essentially link to the staff that does that's of course the most of the work, right? But the key thing in the cooperative are the volunteers, the local groups that are spread all over Spain, that essentially help us essentially transform, move, spread the model, spread the hope for this energy transition, right? And essentially also they serve, if you want, as advertising. So essentially we don't do advertising, so all the advertising is done to this. You can see essentially the plants we have spread all over Spain, most of them solar, but now also wind generation. And we're building more and more every day. Right? So, for example, we have one that is going to be connected soon, right? That required more than 2 million in terms of investment, and we raised this money from our members. Right? So we decided to open a call for contributions to the social capital of the cooperative. That for almost 5 million euros for a period of 2 weeks, and in less than 24 hours we raised that amount of money to invest in our projects along with others, right? So we have all sorts of different projects. So we have another project which is called Generation Kilowatt Hour, which is a project where so a group of people can contribute and build and ask the cooperative to build a plant, and then you can essentially take out, essentially you get the energy that this plant generates at cost. Like a community again building we organize, of course, collective solar purchases. And then we have many other different projects, just again promoting, investing projects, new projects, innovative projects into the energy. So, and of course, this is just a quick introduction. And of course, you can imagine that when you think about all these different people in all these different roles, we all have different motives. I guess, some of the ones, the 3 ones you mentioned are in the minds of many of us.
So I would say that energy is the thing that link all these people together, but in the end, everyone belonging to the community may have its different motivation, or maybe give more importance to one motivation rather than the other, while not totally neglecting it. So now I will give the possibility to the 2 non-energy cooperative, energy community involved persons to comment, having of course in mind the point of view of the institutions. Jan, do you want to say something? What's the view of the European Commission on these energy communities, the functions and the motivations behind them?
Yes, from a policy-making point of view, the motivation, of course, was that energy communities help with the promotion of renewable energy. So one of the key elements why we proposed an article on energy communities was to help us reach our ambitious renewable energy targets. And we think we need to get citizens involved in the energy transition. And we saw that energy communities are a good way to do that. And so this was our main driver to propose something on energy communities.
So to really use the citizens, involve the citizens in order to speed up the decarbonization of the EU in a way. Yvonne, do you want to add anything on this? Can you unmute?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
perfect.
Sure. Hello. Well, as a regulator or from the regulatory perspective, we are treating energy communities as a market actor, as any other actor involved in the market. So there is no special treatment as such. I've been looking up some studies or some statistics from the German Cooperative Association, and basically they're coming to the same results as the result presented by the GRC. The association have asked the members what were the main motivations to be involved in a cooperative, and they had the option to answer between 0, no motivation, and 3, very high motivation. And here the responses are going from the highest benefit is the promotion of renewable energy. The second highest was the promotion of regional value creation. And the third highest motivation was the dividend payment for members, so the economic benefits. So this is, I think it's an internal survey within the members. So it concurs with the result of GRC.
So by quoting Latin people, I would say pecunia non olet. Even people involved in energy communities like to make, in a sense, of course, not to waste their money. They want, maybe they don't want to make big profits, but they take care of the economic dimensions of this activity. Good. So now we move to the next step of our discussion, debate, because we saw the reasons for these energy communities, the functions that they may perform in the energy system. But what is the framework in the EU? How does the European Union, but also the member states, treat, in a sense, the energy communities? All of you know that with the adoption of the recast of the Renewable Directive and the Directive for the Internal Market on Electricity, the European Union now has a legal framework in place and defines 2 types of communities. They are not, of course, all the possible communities in the world, but they have, the European Union has a definition, well, actually 2 definitions for 2 different types of communities, the RECs and the CHECs, so renewable energy communities and citizens energy communities. All of you probably know there are a lot of discussion on the content of these 2 articles. My question for you now will be, do you think that the new European legal framework is appropriate to foster the uptake of energy communities or not? Chiara, please, I will stop sharing and you can launch the poll. So we can see what people think, if the EU is promoting them or maybe not particularly. And then I will invite my panelists to, in particular, Jan and Yvonne, to express their view on the result of the poll, and maybe also to tell us something about the challenges that we have ahead, because the adoption of the legal framework at the European level is not the end of the story. So I saw that Chiara closed the poll. We have a clear majority of people, more than half, that says that the European legal framework is appropriate to foster the uptake of energy communities. Quite a good number, I would say, do not know. More or less 1/3 of the people in our audience do not have a clear view on this. And then a minority says that the answer should be no. The EU does not have a framework appropriate for fostering the uptake of energy communities. Okay, so Jan, you represent here the European Commission. What's your view on these answers? What can you say about the results of the clean energy package discussion, and what are the challenges ahead?
Well, I'm of course happy that 55% of the participants agree that that it's an appropriate framework, because setting up this framework wasn't easy, because it's the first time this is regulated, or that energy communities are recognized on a European level. And it really wasn't an easy task to find the right definition, and also get a good balance on what the right of obligations should be. And this, so it was done through, quite a long process. Also then, after we had made the proposal, a long process between the European Parliament and the Council, and with speaking to stakeholders. And I think I agree that to start with, for the first time it's here, we have a good legal framework that we can build on. And I think you mentioned Article 16 and Article 22, which is of course very relevant, but you should also perhaps mention Article 2 of both directives, which contains the definitions. And it's important to look at the definitions as well, because they make clear that here we're talking about a social concept. This is not so much about technology. It's about really the group of people, of citizens, that we want to involve in the energy transition.
I have to unmute. You're right, Diana. In fact, Article 2 in both directives provide important definitions in this respect, and they clearly present a social definition of these communities. Yvonne, what do you want to say on this? Maybe from the point of view of Germany, which is an important country of the EU, that has now the duty of transposing the European directive into national legislation, and eventually clarify some of the, I would not say gaps, but pieces of the framework that the EU directives voluntarily left open to further definition at the national level.
Right. As you mentioned, Germany is a big country, but we already have a tradition of energy cooperatives. So we have over 800 energy cooperatives already existing, and since longer. So this is not a new concept as such. And all the activities described in Article 32, which they're supposed to be able to perform, like producing, consuming, storing, and selling renewable energy. All of this is already possible today. So I think in terms of implementation of the European framework, our thinking is, well, first our assessment is that a lot of things requested by the directive are already in place. So there is not a fully new concept to be implemented in the German legislation, because, as I mentioned, energy cooperatives are already existing and acting. I think from the regulatory perspective, we have to make sure that this doesn't go in the direction that we have an increasing number of closed distribution networks, or a number of increasing installation or groups of installation which are not injecting the electricity produced into the network, and everything is consumed behind the network. So the concept of collective self-consumption within an energy community. This is linked to Article 21, covering the renewable self-consumers, but this is an aspect which is, of course, wished by most energy communities, that they would be able to perform self-consumption within the community, which makes sense. Well, but the thing is, the regulator has to make sure that the network or the network operators are doing properly their job to ensure security of supply. And in order to ensure security of supply, they have to make investment, they have to strengthen the network, and all of this cost needs to be re-socialized. And currently it's being done through network charges. And if you have energy community operating outside the network, they will not be paying any network charges on the electricity. They will be self-producing and self-consuming. And if this number is staying small, that's not an issue. But if this is an increasing trend, we will have the problem that the whole refinancing of the network would need to be rethought, because currently you pay for each kilowatt hour consumed, and delivered to the network, you pay a network charge. And if you don't retrieve this electricity anymore from the network, or you retrieve less electricity from the network because you have your own generation and you self-consume it, the share or the number of people financing or contributing to the financing of the network will be diminishing, and the remaining people will have to pay more network charges to make sure that the network can be functioning properly. And it will not reduce the need for network extension and strengthening, because there are times where the renewables are not available, and you will always be in need to use the public network. So the autarky idea is not really realistic. And so that's one aspect. And regarding the framework, as I mentioned, we think that we have a lot of things which are already in place. We don't need to address them, because all of the activities, as I mentioned, are already possible today. There are no special privileges for energy communities, but there are no barriers for them to act as network operator, to act as supplier. They just need to fulfill all the requirements which are relevant for all the other actors. But the only thing which is definitely not possible today in the current German framework is this aspect of common self-consumption. This is not possible today.
Sorry, there was a bit of noise. What is not possible in the German framework now?
Collective self-consumption is not allowed.
No, indeed, if I understand you correctly, you're saying that from the point of view of the regulators, energy communities are not an issue. It might be an issue, there might be an issue with some activities that energy communities implement, in particular with collective self-consumption, and when communities develop maybe microgrids or schemes behind the meter, so behind the point of the connection with the public grid. So let's say issues related to some activities and not to communities in general. For instance, what Zoma Energia does most of the time would not represent a problem, because it's a generator and a supplier, and it fits well in the current framework. Albert, do you want to say something on this? Do you want to react briefly? And maybe, Yvonne, you can mute yourself, and then we can unmute Albert. So while Albert unmutes, I will give the floor to Patrick. And in the meanwhile, Albert, you can try. Ah, you manage, Albert.
I think I was not allowed, so I was pressing, but I was not allowed. Yeah, so I guess I guess here the challenge, I guess all over Europe is it's to transpose this is that different countries are at the very different stages of development themselves, right? So, but yeah, so I think one of the interesting things I think of the energy community, especially the local energy communities, other than the economic benefits that one can get in terms of flexibility of making the demand more flexible, and then the possibilities of a storage, is also this acceptance, of the projects at the local level. That's I think one of the key aspects that one needs to get, and then what one can get with this local with the local energy communities. I think that's something I would want to stress. In terms of the directive, I think one of the things I was thinking is I think it's a good framework. The question is whether whether we are ambitious enough in terms of objectives, right? So I'm not sure whether there are clear targets, clear objectives as to what should be the share, or what should be the importance of these things in the mix in a few years. And we know that if we don't have objectives, we don't get there, right? So and that's maybe the thing I'm less sure about.
Thank you. Patrick, do you want to comment? Again, he's not able.
Right, yeah, I was still muted. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important question. I think having definitions of renewable energy communities and citizen energy communities is possibly a little bit confusing. And a lot of the discussion I've seen so far has been trying to work out what, if anything, is the difference between the two. But having said that, similarly to my take on, say, UK policy evolving over the last 10 years, I think it's a very positive step that national and international policymakers are including energy communities as actors in policy frameworks, because let's remember that that wasn't always the case, and it's a comparatively recent issue, even if there is difficulties of definition. So broadly, I'm happy with it, but I think there's probably a good reason why a third of the people on the call are unsure about whether in the long term it's defined appropriately. And I think a lot of this is about what actually happens over the next 5 to 10 years as a result of the policies. And with that in mind, I just wanted to make a little bit of a reference to UK energy policy here, which may or may not be well known to many of the people who are logging in today. But back in 2014, 2015, we had a government who did take community energy seriously pretty much for the first time, created a new strategy, created lots of new mechanisms and instruments. And that was absolutely fantastic. And it's largely forgotten 5 years later. So I think everybody needs to see this as an evolving process over time. And just as energy communities might prosper for a certain period or be encouraged, you can have changes in administration, policy changes, and things can go in the other direction. And the emphasis in the UK now, at least outside of Scotland, which is still broadly pro-community energy, is much more towards clean growth, industrial strategy, market actors, innovation, and it's less about, I think, for me, community energy, of course, it should be treated as a market actor in economic transactions, but you are missing something very important if you only see community energy initiatives as economic initiatives. And therefore, I think that the evolution of policy over time is what is important, and the UK has shown that it can go forwards and backwards, and I hope that that is not the case in other domains.
I see. This is interesting. So you say the support by the government, the politics is important, and sometimes this is related to trends that go beyond the energy realm, that maybe are related to the desire by the government in charge at that time to support the community, the idea of community more in general, and energy being just one. And of course, with change of governments, maybe this can become no more high, can rank no more high in the agenda of the government, and then we may slow down the development or the attention to communities and to energy communities in particular. Very interesting, and I would say that this brings us directly to the last part of our, to the 3 steps that I had in mind, which is the scenarios for the next decade, because we discussed the motivations, the functions, we discussed the legal framework in place. Of course, is a brief assessment. But now, based on this, we should be able to say something on the future development of energy communities in the EU. It's an interesting topic. I must say there is not much written about it. In particular, there is not much quantitative analysis, also because energy communities are per se a topic that is for the moment not clearly defined in the statistics. You cannot find a lot of consistent statistics across member states. There was this study by Delft that was promoted, that was requested by a few European organizations. They say that energy citizens could increase by 10 times in this decade as compared to 2015, the situation that was taken as reference, and then they can double again by 2050. That energy citizens could cover maybe 1/4 of electricity, EU electricity demand in 2030, and maybe half, almost half in 2050. Within these energy citizens, there are collectives, so communities of households, SMEs, local public authorities, and they could be responsible for 1/3 of the electricity produced by energy citizens. So in the end, of course, the share on the overall EU electricity mix is, of course, smaller. This is basically the only statistics I was able to find, the only study I was able to find. I would like now to ask the question to the audience. In your view, what will be the share of total electricity generation covered in the EU by energy communities at the end of this decade? Of course, this is only a proxy of what is the role of energy communities, but I think it could be a nice proxy. You have 4 possible answers: negligible, maybe around 10%. You can say 20% or more, or you can say, I don't know, I have no clue. So please make your guess, possibly as much as educated as possible, and then I will ask my guest today to comment on it. Of course, I don't expect them to provide me with a precise number in 10 years, but maybe the trends that they see on the horizon and the reasons for those trends and the scenario they envisage. Still a couple of seconds, and then Chiara can close the poll. Great. So we have a winner, around 10%. It was voted by more or less 40% of those who answered. So it's, let's say, 1/4 of everybody in the room. Then we have all the other people that voted that are very close, basically. Negligible, around 20% or more, or don't know. All of them are more or less the same. The study by C Delft implicitly was supporting the second option, because 1/3 of it was 1/12 of the entire EU electricity demand, so about 10%. So I go back to my panelist, Jan. 2 minutes. Tell me, what do you think about these poll results, and what's your view? What is in your mind a reasonable scenario for energy communities in this decade?
I'm one of those who said don't know. It will go up, I think. It's part of the legislation that member states will need to put in place an enabling framework that promotes the uptake of renewables, of renewable energy communities. So I think the number will increase also in those member states where at the moment energy communities are an unfamiliar concept, where there's no experience with it in national legislation. But by how much, I find it very difficult to say, because the concept really depends on engaged citizens, on people who put a lot of energy into it and who want to be engaged and who have the drive to motivate others to set up a community with them. And I think there is a limit of those kind of people who are willing to invest that much of their private time and of their private energy into something like that. Because I guess often those are people who could also earn a high salary at an incumbent, you know. So I think this intrinsically to me seems to set a bit of a limit on to how much you can scale it up. But from a legal point of view, we want to make everything possible for those kind of citizens to make use of the opportunity that our legislation provides them with.
Okay, thank you. Patrick, do you want to comment?
Well, it's a bit like looking into a crystal ball. It's very difficult to see what's coming, but I think Jan has already mentioned some of the issues around how the community's energy sector could grow in the future. It will depend on how well policymakers are able to circulate clear visions and ideas of what energy communities are, particularly to those policy contexts where they have not been that, it's not a conventional idea, it's quite a new idea. But I do think that if you're thinking about energy communities, you're not just thinking about energy, you're thinking about broader social and cultural benefits. So, for example, in the UK, when feed-in tariffs were available, communities engaged in energy issues so that they could provide an income stream to the community to do other things that they wanted to do. And those other things could be about biodiversity, or they could be about tackling poverty, they could be about education and training and skills. So if it's too narrowly focused, I worry about a policy that only sees them as mechanisms to ensure an accepted and participatory energy transition. They can be so much more than that, but of course there's always been a challenge of quantifying the non-energy or non-economic benefits of energy community initiatives. So that, I'm afraid, is one of the challenges of this domain. But I think, as I said, if the policymakers can mobilize a clear idea and definition, and organizations like ResCoop and the WWEA have already come up with some quite nice definitions of community energy, and mobilize those visions across European member states, then I think that's a very strong platform to take forward.
Okay, thank you. So indeed, you agree also that it's difficult to really quantify this phenomenon, and this is a problem in itself also to look into the future. Yvonne, do you want to...
Just one last thing. It's only a problem if we value numerical evidence above anything else, and that's the problem. Policymakers, and it's easy for me to talk about this as an academic, but basically we weigh certain types of evidence as more strong than others, and I think that's something that we also need to be careful about.
Okay, so you see, maybe numbers do not tell the whole story, and especially in this case where a lot of not easy to quantify things are important, numbers can really be a poor indicator for the role of communities, energy communities in the future. I see. Yvonne, do you have a guess? Do you want to say something?
Okay. Well, I would have to look in the crystal ball as well. I think there's a new momentum for this energy community concept, thanks to the European framework. As far as I have the numbers available, currently we have 1 gigawatt of installed capacity owned by energy communities in Germany, which is like 1%, or less than 1%. And I believe that in order to ensure our energy transition and the acceptance we need for that, there will be a new momentum for energy communities, definitely. We need to do more for the acceptance, especially if we want to deploy a lot of wind onshore energy throughout the country, which is not that well seen by a lot of neighbors to those wind installations. So I think definitely there will be an upward trend, but I also see the same limitation as mentioned by Jan. Not everybody is interested in environmental issues. Not everybody wants to put that much time into it, effort into it, and I'm sorry, I only see the energy perspective. I don't know about the social aspect mentioned by Patrick. These are definitely valuable and important as well, but just from the energy perspective, renewable energy perspective, I think there will be an important
We have a problem probably with the connection of Yvonne.
more, but I think all in all, it will be limited.
Okay, so you have you say communities can bring many benefits, but in terms from the narrow point of view of the energy system, it's not likely that we will end up in 10 or maybe 20 years with an energy system dominated by or by these new actors, by these new collective initiatives led by citizens. I see. Albert, you are part of one of these communities. What is your view on this? You grow a lot in a few years time. What's your view on the next 10 years?
Yeah, I guess, you know, if I put my hat as an economist, I always refuse making predictions about what's going to happen next year, but, you know, what's going to happen in 10 years, even less, right? But I would say that at the same time, I'm very optimistic. In general, I think, you know, from also what I've seen in the growth of some energy, that in less than 10 years, you know, it went from you know, nothing to have you know, a substantial number of people, a lot of them very engaged, all over the place. I mean, and motivating others, right? So it's true that that you need a certain amount of people that are willing to take this you know, this lead, right? And these people are driven, not necessarily, should be driven not only by economic benefits, but by other concerns. And I think the climate, you know, the concerns about the climate will become more and more important, and we'll find more and more these people willing to take this this cost, if you want. So so taking these decisions rather than going just simply for the economic goals. But then, of course, you need, other than these people, you need you know, a lot of other people also following, right? And of course, we don't need to forget as well the economic motive. It cannot be that you know, it's more expensive, you know, to go with it than if you stay with your traditional suppliers and so on, right? So there should not be big costs, right? And here I think the legislation, the policies will be super important to make it big, right? To make it big. But yeah, I think you know, I can see that in, you know, even in a country like Spain, you know, you see our growth, right? And you see that people keep coming in, but never switch back, right? So it's something that is is increasing, right? So it's the question is how fast we can make it increase, right? But we see other cooperatives developing in other places. So I don't know. I think I'm maybe more optimistic than most of the others, right? But I think if we have the right policies, the right tools, this can really be important in the coming years.
I see your point. So if I understand, say probably at least some types of energy communities are thriving, and you expect them to thrive in the future. Probably those that balance the non-economic with the economic benefits. And maybe some cooperatives like Some Energia can do this trick. Of course, my question then is, will they remain a true community when they grow so much? But this is another very big question. It's already been addressed. And it could be the same for other cases in Europe, like EcoPower or others. But now we have only 4 minutes because we were taken by this very interesting discussion. I will try to pick up a couple of questions from the audience. Sorry for those that we will not be able to answer. Yvonne, one question for you. Meterstorm is already a form of collective self-consumption in buildings? Yes or no? In German? It's not. It's not. Do you want to say something more?
Yes, it works. Yeah. No, it's not self-consumption. It's a supply concept. So it's within a building. The owner or the operator of the PV installation, for example, is delivering the electricity produced by the PV panels within the building, but it's a supply contract. So they have to pay the network charges for the delivery and the renewable surcharge. It's a bit cheaper, but not really cheaper. So that's why it's not really taking off, but it's definitely not self-consumption.
Okay, understood. Second question. If energy community there is one of our guests, Selma. She asked, if we treat energy community in the same manner as traditional players, aren't we running the risk of a level playing field? And this is not leading to incentivizing citizens to engage in such communities. Jan, want to say something? There is this concern, this balance, having a level playing field versus promoting the uptake of communities. Do you want to say something, Jan? Or it's tricky? Unmute. Can you unmute?
Yes, I think our legislation makes clear to what extent renewable energy communities can be treated like traditional players, you know, and there are, if you meet all the criteria of a renewable energy community as defined in the directive, member states have to promote you with some measures. I think, and this they will have to do on the exact regulation as different actors. This is where it becomes a bit more tricky. The European legislation only says that the regulation has to be appropriate. Now, of course, that's an open, it leaves a lot of room to interpretation. But then here you need to see if you have a very small community and they share electricity among themselves, if you regulate them like a big incumbent company, for instance, this would probably not be appropriate because it's too big, too heavy a burden for the impact that those few people have. So this is what's there to make sure that there is a good level of regulation.
Okay, so I see you say now it's up to the member states to maybe based also on their situation, try to find the balance among the several different factors that are involved in order to treat entities that are not the same in a similar sense, but not in the sense that they are obliging to respect the same rules, but that they are treated fairly and proportionately. Good. Now a question for Jan. Do you want to comment? Do you want to react? Yes, yes. Yeah, can you unmute Jan, Chiara? Yes.
Yes, but of course, thank you. Of course, this is not a balance that's struck easily because there's not that much experience around it yet. So I think this will require a lot of learning still.
Experimentation by the states. Then a question for Albert. Is it Som Energia an aggregator? Can, yes or no? In my understanding, no. Can we unmute Albert?
Maybe it's role in the future, but this figure is still not developed in Spain.
So at the moment, a community like Som Energia is a generator and a supplier, which is different from an aggregator. It's another business model that will come up maybe in the future. Okay, and then the last question, because we are out of time. Will energy cooperative have to comply with the clean energy package provisions to continue acting as energy cooperatives, or just in the case they want to be treated as check or wreck? So Ignacio, in my view, is asking, is there a space for communities that do not fit the check or the wreck definition? What is the space for them in the future? I don't know if one of you want to answer this question, this last question.
Maybe I can answer that.
Yes.
I think there is, because our legislation is not exclusive. So if there are different national models that exist, they can exist. It's just member states are not obliged to give this enabling framework also to those forms of communities. But member states can develop additional models, can develop different type of models, as long as also renewable energy communities and citizen energy communities are transposed the way they are in the European legislation.
Okay, so in a sense, they can be more progressive or more innovative than what is mandated by European legislation. There are many other questions. Unfortunately, our time is ended. So I invite everybody to thank our guests today. They were very nice to accept our invitation and to spend 1 hour with us. The recordings will be of the webinar will be, of the online debate will be soon available online. You can join us again next week. We are planning other interesting debates on sandboxes, on the regulation of infrastructure. So just connect to our website. I do thank you again, and I close this online debate. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.